It started with a yellow slip, one of those delivery notices you get when you weren't home to sign for a package, only I was home. I work from my garage office and I watched that mailbox like a hawk. After the third one in 2 weeks, I knew something was off. I'm Lennox O'Dell. 45, divorced, a welding instructor with a side hustle fixing up motorcycles. I bought my house in Oak Glen Estates 6 years ago, quiet neighborhood, good schools, decent neighbors. Or so I thought. Then came the HOA elections and with them Marlene Whitford. 50-something, platinum blonde bob, drives a white BMW X3 like she's in a royal motorcade. She was elected HOA treasurer last year, and ever since, she's acted like she personally owned every square foot of the neighborhood. She had a real talent for finding violations where there weren't any mailboxes a half-inch too low, grass a shade too dry, cars parked at the wrong angle. She especially had it out for me after I refused her request to remove that eyesore of a motorcycle lift from my closed garage. Said it violated the spirit of the neighborhood. That was the first time I laughed in her face. Bad idea, apparently. 2 weeks ago, I got a letter taped to my door. Notice of outstanding HOA fees. $325.00 failure to pay will result in escalated fines and potential legal action. Except I'd never gotten the first notice, or the second, or the third. And I pay my dues quarterly auto-billed. I logged into the HOA portal, my account. Delinquent, I called the HOA office. No answer, sent an email, no reply. I even walked to the clubhouse during posted hours. Locked doors. Then I saw Marlene's BMW parked out front, drinking a smoothie in the passenger seat like it was her break time. I knocked on her window. She rolled it down halfway. Lennox, if this is about your late fees, I suggest you take it up with the board. I am taking it up with the board. Why is my account showing overdue? She took a dramatic sip of her smoothie. Maybe check your mail more often. I do check my mail, the notices aren't coming. She smiled like she was enjoying a private joke. Then maybe talk to the post office. I'm not your secretary. I knew right then she was behind it. I didn't have proof, but I could feel it in my gut, and I don't let people mess with me. I've been through worse than a power-tripping suburban tyrant, so I set up a camera. Tiny little thing disguised in a fake sprinkler head at the edge of my garden. Direct line of sight to the mailbox. I also put a motion sensor behind the mailbox door, rigged to send me an alert when it opened. I wanted timestamps. Patterns. For 3 days, nothing but the mail carrier. Then, on the 4th day, right after lunch, the motion alert pinged. I pulled up the footage on my phone. There she was, Marlene, walking her fluffy white dog, Princess, in one hand and in the other, a pair of gardening gloves. She paused in front of my mailbox, looked around, opened it, reached in and pulled out a white envelope. Gloved hand and all. She slipped it into her Louis Vuitton tote like she was picking a flower. I nearly shouted. I watched her walk 5 more steps, pretend to fiddle with her dog's leash, and then casually head back toward her house like she hadn't just committed a federal crime. I saved the clip, made copies, one to a flash drive, one to a hidden cloud folder, and one for fun in a folder labeled Queen HOA Thief. 2 days later, I got another final notice taped to my door. This one said the HOA would be placing a lien on my property if I didn't resolve the outstanding balance immediately. I didn't react. Not yet. Instead, I printed stills from the video, a full sequence, her face, her hand in the mailbox, the envelope, the bag, all of it. Then I walked to her house and rang the bell. She opened the door with that same smug expression. "Lennox," she said flatly. "Hey, Marlene. Just wanted to let you know I'll be at the next board meeting. Thought I'd bring a little show and tell." She blinked. "Excuse me? I have footage of you stealing my mail." Her eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, but hey, let's make it interesting. I'll bring popcorn." Then I turned and walked off. That Friday, the board meeting was packed. Word had gotten around. People love drama when it's not about them. I sat in the front row. Marlene sat at the head table, trying to look unbothered, but her fingers kept twitching near her charm bracelet. I waited until the resident concerns portion of the meeting. I have a concern, I said, about mail theft, specifically a member of this board stealing mail from my personal mailbox, which, last I checked, is a federal offense. The room went quiet. I pulled out the stills. Pass them around. Then I plugged a flash drive into the meeting room's projector and played the video. Gasps. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." One of the other board members, Mr. Jensen, the secretary, stood up and said, "Marlene, is this real?" Marlene stood, all flushed and tight-lipped. "This is clearly taken out of context. I was checking to make sure his mailbox wasn't overfilled. It's our duty to prevent unsightly appearances in the neighborhood," I laughed. "With gloves." "And a purse big enough to smuggle a turkey," she snapped. "How dare you?" I interrupted. "And you've been sending me fake fines, haven't you? Hoping I wouldn't notice." "Well, I did. And I've already sent this footage to the local postmaster. I'm guessing they won't see this as a beautification effort." The meeting exploded in whispers and side eyes. Mr. Jensen looked sick. "We'll need to speak privately, Marlene." But it was too late. The damage was done. I wasn't the only one missing notices. Turns out 4 other residents had the same story. Late fees, unpaid violations, all conveniently never showed up in their mail. Until now, they'd blamed the post office. That night, I got a call from the police. They'd received my statement and the video. They were opening an investigation. I told them I'd be happy to testify, and I wasn't done yet. By Monday morning, the neighborhood had shifted. People didn't wave as they passed Marlene's house anymore. The same women who used to jog by and compliment her landscaping now crossed the street without breaking stride. Her usual morning routine of pruning her rose bushes in full view of the street had vanished. The roses were wilting. No more fresh mulch. I'd gotten a call from Detective Bowers with the county sheriff's office. He'd reviewed the footage and said it was more than sufficient to open a criminal mail theft case. I gave him the original raw video files, along with the time logs from the motion sensor and a notarized statement detailing the sequence of events. He promised to follow up after speaking to the postmaster, who had already escalated the complaint to the federal level. Apparently, tampering with residential mailboxes was serious enough to involve the USP's Inspector General's office. I hadn't told anyone that part yet. I was waiting for the right moment. That afternoon, I got a call from my neighbor, Roland. Roland was a retired Navy chief, built like a fridge and nearly as subtle. He'd kept mostly to himself until now, but apparently the board meeting had stirred something. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always." He came over carrying a thick folder. Inside were printouts, emails, scanned letters, even a few photos. He handed them to me one by one. "That's from last October. HOA fined me for having a shed they said wasn't on my approved plans, only it was. Has been since I moved in 7 years ago." I flipped through the documents. Sure enough, his original purchase contract included an aerial photo with the shed clearly visible. They still tried to fine me. $500. I paid it just to avoid the headache. But now, I'm thinking that was a scam too. He showed me another letter, this one with a signature that seemed oddly familiar. It was Marlene's. "I think she's been doing this for a while," Roland said. "And I think she's been banking on people just paying instead of fighting." It matched what I was starting to see. After the board meeting, 3 more neighbors had stopped me on the street to share their own stories: mysterious finds, missing correspondence, and in one case, a lien notice for a fence that hadn't even been built yet. This wasn't petty power tripping anymore. It was orchestrated fraud. I compiled everything: video evidence, resident testimonies, documentation of false fines, and now Roland's folder. I scanned it all, organized it by date, and burned a copy onto a disk for the sheriff's office. Wednesday morning, I got the call, Detective Bowers again. He sounded energized. "We executed a subpoena on the HOA's financial records. You won't believe what we found." I leaned against my truck. "Try me." For the last 16 months, Marlene's been issuing manual fines not logged in the official HOA system. She'd print fake notices and hand-deliver them. The payment's money orders mostly were never deposited into the HOA's account. They were cashed at a check cashing place near her sister's store in Fairgrove. I whistled low. She's been stealing from the residents. That's not just mail theft anymore. No, Bowers said. We're looking at wire fraud, embezzlement, and possibly identity theft if any of the fines involved forged signatures. I've got neighbors willing to testify. Good, we'll need them. That night, I called a few of them over Roland, Mrs. Kim from 2 doors down, and a young couple who'd just moved in last year, Marcus and Talia. We sat around my garage workbench and pieced together a timeline. Each of them had a different version of the same experience: suspicious fines, missing mail, and a sense of helplessness. Talia asked, "Is she going to jail?" "If the feds get involved," I said. "There's a strong chance." Marcus leaned forward. "What happens to the HOA, according to the bylaws?" I said, flipping through a copy I'd printed. "If a board member is found guilty of misconduct, the remaining board has to vote them out and call a special election to replace them." Mrs. Kim frowned gently. "She'll fight it." "Let her," I said. "She's already lost." The next HOA meeting was slated for the following Thursday, but things moved faster than that. On Friday, a sheriff's cruiser pulled into Marlene's driveway. She wasn't home, but her husband was. They entered the house with a search warrant. By the time she returned grocery bags in hand, 2 officers were waiting. She was arrested on the spot. They put her in handcuffs right there on her own brick walkway, in full view of 3 neighbors and 1 very nosy golden retriever. Word spread like wildfire. By the weekend, the HOA president, a soft-spoken dentist named Clark Weller, called an emergency meeting. He looked pale, like he'd aged 5 years overnight. "We've begun a full audit of the HOA's records," he said. "And we'll be cooperating with authorities in every way possible." I raised my hand. "Will there be restitution for residents who were scammed?" Clark nodded. "We're working on that, but it will depend on what the audit finds and what the insurance covers." Roland stood. "We'll be watching that process closely." Clark didn't argue. The board voted unanimously to remove Marlene from her position effective immediately. They had no choice. The bylaws were clear. 3 days later, I got a letter. This time it was postmarked, stamped, and official. From the Office of the United States Postal Inspector. It notified me that charges were being formally pursued against Marlene Whitford for mail theft and obstruction of delivery. A federal case. Maximum penalty, 5 years per count. I added it to the folder. By the end of the month, the community had changed. People were talking again. Neighbors who'd never met were swapping stories over coffee. There was a shared sense of relief, like a storm had passed and we'd all survived it together. The special election was scheduled for the following month. Roland decided to run for treasurer. He had my vote. As for Marlene, she was released on bail but under home monitoring. Her once perfectly manicured lawn had gone to seed. The white BMW hadn't moved in a week. No more smoothies, no more strutting with Princess, just silence. I never spoke to her again, didn't need to. The neighborhood had seen the truth. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The first time I saw the bank statement, I was at Roland's kitchen table, eating a ham sandwich that tasted like it had been carved off a battleship bulkhead. He slid the paper across the wood with a grim look and tapped the bottom line with 1 thick finger. "See that?" he said. "That's the HOA account, or what's left of it." The number was lower than I expected, way lower. "How much was in it last quarter?" "Just under 48,000, he said. "Now it's barely 12. "Where'd the rest go?" "That," he said, "is what Clark doesn't want to talk about." Roland had gotten access to the financials through a clause in the bylaws that allowed any homeowner to request an audit after a board member was removed for misconduct. It had taken him 3 days of phone calls, 2 certified letters, and a pointed reminder that he'd once overseen logistics for a floating nuclear reactor, but he got them. I leaned back and stared at the numbers: transfers, withdrawals. A few odd vendor payments that didn't match up with any known work orders. Who's Southland Property Consulting? No one knows. They were paid $9 grand last month. And Alpine Renewal Services? Same thing, $7 grand, no contract, no invoice. I rubbed my jaw. She didn't just steal from residents, she was bleeding the whole organization. She wasn't working alone, Roland said. Someone had to sign off on these. That made sense. Marlene had been treasurer, but even a crooked treasurer needed someone to cover the paper trail. I flipped through the statements again and found a pattern. Every suspicious payment had a co-signature. The initials matched one name, Clark. Roland nodded once. My stomach tightened. Clark had played the part of the overwhelmed dentist trying to do the right thing, but the numbers didn't lie. He'd signed off on every questionable expense for the last 6 months. You think he was in on it? I think he started as lazy and ended up dirty, and now he's hoping Marlene takes the fall alone. We didn't say anything for a while. The rain ticked against the kitchen window. Outside, the neighborhood looked normal. Sprinklers ran on timers. Kids rode bikes past trimmed hedges. But under the surface, something was cracking. You still got that contact at the sheriff's office? Roland asked. Yeah, Bowers. Why? He reached under the table and pulled a manila envelope out of a plastic grocery bag. It was thick, heavy. Inside were copies of every flagged transaction, matched with HOA meeting minutes, most of which made no mention of the payments. The rest were vague, like approved general maintenance or community improvement consulting. None of it was legal. I drove it straight to the sheriff's office the next morning. Detective Bowers met me in a side room furnished with an old metal desk and a filing cabinet so dented it looked like it had been kicked by a mule. He took the envelope, flipped through a few pages, and let out a low whistle. This is solid, he said. You're saying the board president co-signed these? Everyone, he nodded. All right, that's enough for a forensic audit. If we can prove he knew what the payments were for, he's looking at conspiracy to commit fraud. Possibly embezzlement if any of the funds ended up in a personal account. What happens next? We talked to the county prosecutor. If they greenlight a case, we'll issue a formal subpoena. Clark's not going to like that. I left the station with a sick feeling in my gut. It wasn't just about Marlene anymore. This thing went deeper, and if Clark had been in on it, that meant every board decision from the last half year was suspect. Every resident who'd been fined, threatened, or ignored had been dealing with a rigged system. Back home, I found a flyer taped to my front door. Community Unity BBQ hosted by the HOA board. Saturday, 2 p.m. at the Greenbelt Pavilion. Let's come together and move forward. Underneath the cheerful fonts and clip art balloons was a signature. Clark Weller, HOA president. I stared at it for a long time. Saturday came faster than expected. The weather was perfect, sunny, 75, with a breeze sharp enough to keep the flies off the potato salad. I showed up just before 2 with Roland and Marcus. Talia brought a folding table and a box of clipboards. We set up across from the food tables, under the shade of a sycamore. Our sign said, "Request a full HOA audit sign here." We had 30 signatures in the first hour. Clark arrived late, wearing a khaki polo and that same tight smile he'd worn at the emergency meeting. He made the rounds, shaking hands, pretending nothing had happened. When he spotted our table, his expression froze for half a second, then he walked over. "Lennox," he said. "Roland. Marcus. Didn't expect a petition table today. We didn't expect to lose $36,000 either," I said. He shifted his stance. "I understand tensions are high, but this isn't the time or place for that." "Actually," Marcus said, "it's the perfect time. Everyone's here." Clark lowered his voice. "There's a process for these things. I'd appreciate it if we could discuss this in private like adults." "Adults don't co-sign fake invoices," Roland said. Clark's jaw clenched. "You don't understand the complexities involved." Marlene handled the day-to-day finances. I trusted her. "You signed off on vendor payments for companies that don't exist," I said. "That's not trust, that's complicity." He opened his mouth, then closed it. "You'll be hearing from the sheriff's office," I added. They've got the paperwork. Clark backed away like someone had just poured ice water down his shirt. He walked straight to his car and left without saying another word. By the end of the BBQ, we had over 80 signatures. Monday morning, I got an email from Bowers. The county prosecutor had approved the subpoena. They'd already frozen the HOA's operating account and seized a thumb drive from Clark's home computer. According to Bowers, there were emails between Clark and Marlene discussing how to restructure funds creatively and delay audit requests until after the next election. The phrase intent to defraud came up more than once. By Wednesday, Clark had resigned. No press release, no farewell address. Just a typed letter delivered to the HOA inbox and a moving truck parked outside his house the next day. The board scrambled. Without a president or treasurer, they had no authority to approve any decisions. They called for an emergency election, this time with an independent observer from the city's Community Affairs Office. Rowland was elected president. Talia took over as treasurer. Marcus volunteered as compliance officer, mostly to make sure nobody else ever got fined for imaginary violations again. The new board's first act was to hire a legitimate CPA firm to audit the last 3 years of records. Their second act was to create a public portal where every resident could see the monthly financials, meeting minutes, and board decisions. Transparency, the way it should have been from the start. Marlene's court date was set for early September. The charges included federal mail theft, wire fraud, and 3 counts of falsifying financial statements. Clark was named as a co-conspirator. They'd both lawyered up, but the evidence was overwhelming. I didn't plan to attend the trial. I didn't need to. The neighborhood had already delivered its verdict. The day Marlene pled guilty, the courtroom was packed not with cameras or reporters, but with neighbors. Residents from Oak Glen Estates sat shoulder to shoulder on the wooden benches, some in business clothes, some in t-shirts and jeans. No one whispered or fidgeted. Everyone was focused. She wore a navy blue blazer that didn't quite fit, her hands folded tightly in front of her as the judge read the charges. Her lawyer, young, twitchy, and clearly out of his depth, leaned in to whisper something, but she didn't respond. Just kept staring straight ahead like she wasn't even part of the room. When the clerk read the sentence, 18 months probation, restitution of over $40,000, and a permanent ban from serving on any homeowners association board in the state, there wasn't a cheer or round of applause. Just a quiet, collective breath. Afterward, out on the courthouse steps, Rowland leaned over to me. "She's lucky that's all she got," he said. "She won't see it that way," I replied. "People like her never think they're the villain." He nodded and glanced toward the parking lot. "Let's head back. I've got a meeting with the CPA this afternoon." I drove home with the windows down. The air smelled like cut grass and warm asphalt, a clean, honest scent, the kind that reminded you things could be normal again. That evening, the board hosted a community meeting not in the clubhouse, which was still being audited, but at the local library's community hall. No pomp, no banners, just folding chairs and a whiteboard. Rowland stood at the front with a stack of documents in one hand. "We've got a lot to cover," he said. "And not all of it's pretty." He walked everyone through the newly uncovered details, how Marlene had created phony vendor accounts using her cousin's address, how Clark had approved payments without verifying services, and how over a dozen residents had been fined for violations that didn't exist. The CPA's report, finished just that morning, outlined the full extent of the fraud. When Rowland got to the part about the duplicate bank account, an unauthorized HOA account opened in the name of a dissolved landscaping vendor, there were audible gasps. Over $20,000 had been funneled through it. Talia, now the treasurer, stood to explain the legal steps being taken to recover the funds. "We've filed a civil claim against the Whitford estate. If restitution isn't paid, the court can seize personal assets. That includes her vehicle and any property not protected by state exemptions." A man in the back raised his hand. "What about Clark?" Roland nodded toward the whiteboard. He's being charged separately, 3 counts of aiding financial misrepresentation. His arraignment's next month and the prosecutor's already preparing for trial. A woman asked if that meant the HOA was in the clear. Marcus stepped up. We're not out of the woods yet. But we're cutting every unnecessary contract, putting all financials online, and every payment over $1,000 now requires dual signatures, mine and Talia's. We're also writing new bylaws to prevent anyone from holding more than one board position over a 5-year period. Another neighbor, a quiet man named David, who'd never spoken at meetings before, stood up slowly. I'd like to propose a vote to permanently disqualify anyone convicted of fraud or misconduct from holding a board seat again. Seconded. Voted. Unanimous. It was the first time in years that a board meeting ended with people smiling. By the next weekend, I was finally able to focus on something other than HOA corruption. The garage had been neglected for too long, and my latest project, a rusted-out 1982 Honda CB 750, was waiting like a dog at the door. I wheeled it onto the driveway and got to work removing the tank. Across the street, a moving truck was parked in front of Marlene's house. A quiet, efficient crew loaded boxes while Princess, the little white dog, sat tethered to a lawn chair. No sign of Marlene herself, just a tall man in slacks overseeing everything with a clipboard. I didn't wave. Neither did he. By late afternoon, the truck pulled away. A few neighbors watched from porches and driveways, then turned back to their lives. The street felt lighter. A week later, I got a letter from the new HOA board. Real envelope, postmarked with a return address and transparent window. Inside was a formal apology, signed by Roland, Talia, and Marcus. Along with it was a check, a refund of every bogus fine I'd ever received, plus a portion of the recovered legal fees distributed back to residents wrongfully charged. It wasn't a fortune, but it was honest money. And it meant something. That same day, I installed a new mailbox. Bigger, reinforced with a built-in lock, not because I expected another Marlene, but because once you've been burned like that, you don't make the same mistake twice. Later that evening, I was in the garage when Roland dropped by. He brought over a 6-pack of local craft beer and a thick manila envelope. More records, I asked. Final audit summary, he said, setting it on the workbench. Clean as of this month. No unexplained transactions, no duplicate vendors, no missing documents. I cracked a beer and handed him one. That's good news. He leaned against the wall, watching me reassemble the Honda's carburetor. Funny, isn't it? A few months ago, I didn't even know your last name. Now we're running neighborhood politics like we're on a city council. I didn't want this job, I said. I just wanted to be left alone. Same, he said. But I've learned something. Silence is what folks like Marlene count on. People not speaking up, not asking questions. I tightened a bolt and nodded. They don't expect someone to fight back. Well, they do now, he said, raising his bottle. We clinked them together. 3 days later, Marcus introduced the neighborhood's first ever resident oversight committee. It included 5 homeowners selected at random each quarter to review board decisions, dispute violations, and report any irregularities. The bylaws were updated again to reflect the change. It passed with 92% approval. The community had changed. People talked to each other now. Shared tools. Compared notes before signing anything. The fear was gone, and in its place was something better: awareness, accountability. And for the first time in a long while, trust. The last I heard of Marlene, she'd moved in with a relative in a different county. Her name had been removed from the association roster, her access to the HOA portal revoked, and her voting rights formally terminated. No one missed her. As for me, I finished the CB 750. Took it for a ride one Saturday morning, past the old clubhouse, down the freshly repaved main road and out into the hills where the air smelled like pine and the sky went on forever. I didn't think about the mailbox, or the fines, or the meetings. I just rode. Because some wins don't need a speech or a banner. Sometimes, the best victory is knowing you stood your ground and the neighborhood stood with you.